Welcome back to the Postpartum Plan podcast. This podcast is designed to support and empower you through postpartum. Whether you're expecting, in the early postpartum days, or beyond, this space is for you. I'm your host, Madison Fugere, a dedicated postpartum doula and pediatric sleep consultant, striving to help parents feel confident and supported in their parenting journey. Each week, I'm sharing practical tips and expert advice to help you navigate all the postpartum things with confidence. Well, as much confidence as you can. Let's embark on this journey together, making your parenthood as serene and supportive as possible. Paige is a working mother of 4 who is dedicated to sharing her experiences of motherhood, the mental load, and career on social media. Her goal is to help women put words to their experiences so that they are able to better communicate with their partners to have healthy and happier lives. She raises awareness about the mental load of motherhood and advocates for equitable relationships within couples. Additionally, Paige is an advocate for affordable and accessible childcare options, working to make family life more manageable for all. All righty. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to have you come on the podcast and talk about, this mental load topic, and there's so much to it. So you've got it all. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Do you want to kind of tell everybody a little bit about you and your life and family and all of that before we kind of dive into the topic itself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a mom of 4 kids. I work full time in operations, and then I create content on the side. So most people know me from either TikTok or Instagram, where I talk about the mental load, specifically the mental load of motherhood, but just in general. I talk about a lot of motherhood content as it pertains to my lived experience and what I know to be the lived experiences of many women.
Yeah, it's been so nice. Like, I was scrolling TikTok one day, I was just kind of telling Paige, but like I was scrolling and I came across her page and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so relatable for so many of my clients. And occasionally like I'll find TikToks and I'll share them to the Instagram like stories because I find that so many people like relate to some of the stuff, or like you need a good laugh sometimes. And then I started, binging, and I quickly found I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, because you're putting a voice behind a lot of these thoughts that I think parents, especially mothers, don't have the ability to kind of articulate and don't have the ability to understand. Like, that might be why they're so burnt out sometimes. So I think it's like so amazing that you can bring that kind of thought process to their brains and those words to how they're feeling.
Thank you. Yeah, my only goal, or one of my main goals, not my only goal, is to put words to the experiences, because I know when I was in the thick of it, I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know how to explain it to anybody who wasn't inside my brain. And I couldn't tell everybody why I was so angry or resentful or tired or frustrated or whatever it might be. Couldn't find the words to say it. But once I was able to find the words to say it, we were able to actually make meaningful change in our homes. And being able to do that was just like a life-changing thing for me as a mom. And I think so many of us go through that because it's such a life-altering change becoming a parent. And we're given all these tools about how to take care of the baby, but nobody really talks about what you're supposed to do with your marriage or your other kids or just like life in general. How do
Right.
you manage life?
Right.
Nobody talks about that.
Yeah, I think that it's like hopeful for me on this topic because I think that the mental load as like a whole has been started to be talked about a little bit more recently. Like, I've been seeing it more on, all types of pages, not just, parents with children, right? And I've seen a lot of it on just like relationships as a whole. And it makes me hopeful that people are more aware and recognizing things, which is really great. Because I think it takes us into a turn of like the new generation. I think so for so long women were expected to do everything, right, and just kind of take it on, and now work while also keeping the house afloat and keeping the children alive and putting food on the table, right? So being able to find like a shared partnership, I think, can be so beneficial for marriages and families.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's those like memes that go around that are like, oh, boomers really prepared their millennial daughters to do everything, but
Yep.
they didn't prepare their sons for what that was going to look like for them.
Right.
And I think that's a lot of what I hear, which is like everybody wants this like woman who has a job and a career and this life outside of marriage and kids, but then they also expect her to still do 100% of what she would have done if she was a stay-at-home parent. And that's where the disconnect is. And it's not that men, I think, don't have the mental load. Like there's a mental load for everybody. Everybody has one. And I don't think a lot of it's intentional, right? So I think there's some negativity around this conversation and defensiveness, but I think a lot of it's just societal. And we very easily fall into these gender norms when we get married and have kids or no kids or dogs, whatever you have.
Whatever it is.
Yeah, it's so easy to fall into these like traditional roles, even if you're non-traditional. And so I think the more we talk about it, the more we can make changes there. And the more we can also show, our kids and other generations how it can be, right? And yeah, that's what I'm hoping we're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so I'm sure most of the people listening have heard of the mental load, but some people might be like, I don't know, I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm not really sure. Do you want to like give a little bit of context and explanation as to like what we mean when we're talking about like the mental load here and maybe even dive into some like big examples that you see a lot of people
Yeah,
relating to?
sure. So I think there's this misconception between like domestic labor and the mental load, right? They're not the same thing. And so oftentimes when a woman says like, oh, I'm just carrying so much, like mentally, I'm exhausted, I'm carrying so much. That's what they truly mean mentally is the running list inside your brain of all the things that have to happen. I have to buy laundry detergent. Tomorrow's Spirit Day. Next week is Friday. Like it's a pizza Friday. So I need to bring $5 for the daycare. And I have to do all these things. And it's this running list. And if you're like me, it's not just a running list in your brain. You also have it in your reminders app and you have it in your calendar and you have it everywhere. But it's this, yeah, just never ending list of all the things that need to get done for the home to function, for your kids to thrive, whatever it might be. Right. And so oftentimes the conversation will go like this. Hey, if you're overwhelmed, just let me grocery shop. And then they go to grocery shop and they're like, but can you give me the list? And when they're there, they say, but what kind of bread do you want? But what kind of rice did you want? And being the one responsible for knowing and remembering and delegating all these things is the mental side of it. So um, I always think about dinner, right? It's not just about who cooked dinner, who bought the groceries, who planned the grocery list, who knows what's in the cabinet, who knows what's expiring, who knows what the kids are going to eat or not eat, who knows which plate they'll use, which plate they won't use, whatever it is,
Right.
right? Like that's all the mental stuff that goes into the actual making of the dinner. And the making of the dinner at that point feels easy, right?
Right.
By the time you make the dinner, you're just like, oh, whatever, right? Like we got here, we're just going to get through this. But it's that disconnect, right? Like all that mental work that goes into any given task that we do throughout the day.
Yeah. I think there's so much more behind it, like when you break it down. There's been plenty of like I knew about mental load, right? And like I understood it and I talked to my clients a lot about like that kind of things because, the divorce rate is so much higher for the families who are in the first year of having a baby. It's
Right.
exponentially higher. So I talk a lot with families when I'm doing postpartum work about how does this feel in your marriage and what is time being set aside for self-care but also for partner support and things like that. But you think about like there are some things that you've brought up on social media before that I've never really thought of like putting in that way, right? I mean, I think it was the other day that you were mentioning, or maybe it just pops up on my For You pages the other day,
Who
right?
knows? Who knows?
But talking about, how partners might be like, oh, well, I mow the lawn, or I do this with the roof if it gets broken, or I fix the pipes or whatever. And like, yes, that's tasks that someone may do, but that doesn't mean that you're not helping with day-to-day things, right? I mean,
Mhm.
even the whole dinner thing that you were just talking about, you get all that done, finally dinner's on the table, but guess what? You have breakfast tomorrow morning and then lunch and then dinner and then repeat. So
Right.
there's so much to it. And I think that like the more that you kind of sit with this thought and this idea of like breaking down every task into what parts of it exist, the more you realize how exhausting it can be to just be a functioning adult, especially with children.
Right. And I think to your point of like that first year of being a parent, it's so life altering. And I think there's a difference between being a mom or being a dad and being a parent, and actually actively parenting a child,
Right.
right? And I think all of us had different upbringings, and so we saw different things, right? But when we go into parenting, like my husband used to joke, like, I'll be a stay-at-home dad. I would love to do that. That sounds great. Now he's like, that's my worst nightmare. I could never be home all day with 4 kids. He gets so overstimulated by them because he
Yeah.
also has ADHD. So he's like, this is just like, it's like so much all the time. And it's like, right, it's a lot. Becoming a parent is a lot, and you can't know everything or prepare for everything. But what you can prepare for are the things like domestic labor and the mental load, which is like, if I just birthed a baby and maybe I'm breastfeeding or pumping or using formula, whatever it is, how are you supporting? What are you doing that so I don't have to think about things, right? Because I remember going into labor or yeah, with my third, so my older two are adopted, and with my third, and I had written out tons of schedules for the people watching our kids. I had talked to daycare. I had like grocery shopped. I had put together what they will, what they won't eat. I had done all of this work. And then even after I had the baby, I'm the one texting my mom like, "Hey, is everything okay? How are the kids sleeping? Are they eating? Do they need anything?" And I'm doing that. Why am I doing that? I just birthed a baby. Like I just had a traumatic birth. Why am I texting people? Right? Like somebody else could be doing this. And it's kind of that, right? Which is like moms fall into this default role of like mom does and knows everything and dad's here for fun. Like dad's the fun guy and like gets to step in.
Yeah.
And obviously this is not true of every man, but it's a
Right.
very common dynamic that exists. And I think part of the reason it persists is because women or birthing people are the ones who are physically carrying these kids and have ownership over these babies. And when they're born, they're the ones physically doing that. And if they're feeding them from their own body, then they're physically doing that. And so you just have this proximity to the baby. And that proximity, I find, can often lead to just overwhelmed amount of work because it's like, oh, well, you're already with the baby. So why wouldn't you be thinking about the baby?
Right.
Right. And so it's like, oh, like it just happens and it happens quickly. And I know I personally didn't anticipate it and wasn't prepared for what that was going to feel like or how to navigate that. And I
Hmm.
didn't really navigate it until my fourth baby, which sounds crazy. But like when I was postpartum
Yeah.
with my fourth, I think she was 2 months old, I like reached a breaking point and I was like, I am done doing all of this. I cannot keep doing it. I will break down. I can't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot. And
Mhm.
it's as the simplest things as like I'll hear partners say, "Oh, well, I wash the pump parts." And it's like, "Well, yeah, but like your partner's also up every 3 hours round the clock to pump or, soothing the baby. And because they're the ones breastfeeding or they're the ones with the breasts, they can, soothe baby much easier. So I'm just going to wake them up and give them the baby." And like, that is so hard, right? Like, of course, baby is going to soothe so much faster with the parent that's nursing them and has the comfort of their skin and knows their heartbeat and all of that.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean that it's helpful to just kind of hand over every single time, right? I've had some clients who are like, okay, well, my wife really hates waking up in the middle of the night. I'm gonna set the alarms and get all the pump stuff, and like I'll just wake her up and hand them to her. Or like, I'll feed the baby the bottle while she pumps so she's not up by herself. Or, and those are little things. And like, not to say that they're not easy or they're not hard, but they're just little things that you can think of, that might make things a little bit easier. And yeah, making sure that the swaddles that you need are always washed or whatever it may be, but trying to be mentally present too, even though not to say that, partners aren't just as, if not, similarly exhausted as, birthing people, but it's a different type of exhaustion. Um,
Mhm.
and so,
Yeah.
yeah, being able to have all those different types of ways of helping out, especially in those early days to get yourself set on that right track can be life changing.
I think it's also just feeling like ownership and being an active participant, right? I remember there was a
Hmm.
point in time where my husband was like, "Well, what's her feeding schedule now?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, why is this only my job? Why am I the only person who knows her feeding schedule?" And this, like, she was on formula at this point, and I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, you're home, you work from home, you're with her all day." And I'm like, "Right, but if we left her with a nanny all day, we wouldn't expect the nanny to come up with the schedule, right? Like, we would still have to do that, and it's our responsibility as parents to do that together." And so, um, I think there's this weird also notion that women just inherently know what kids need and that we
Yep.
know how to comfort them and what their sleep schedules should be. And really, what it is that women are the ones Googling it, hiring postpartum doulas, doing all of these things to make sure that they are
Yep.
as well equipped as possible to raise these kids. And they feel this ownership and responsibility to do that. And so that's why they're able to do it, is because they're, while they're pumping, they're like Googling everything under the sun
Googling.
to be like, oh my gosh, why is she crying? Why is this happening? How come her poop looks like this? Like, what is this? Right? Like,
Right.
that's all. We don't know that. Nobody knows all of that stuff. We don't inherently know it more than our male counterparts. We just don't.
Right. Right. No, I love that. And it's this thing that like, just even from young age, this kind of like mental load starts, right? Or even like childcare side of things. I talk to so many parents about, the mom maybe has had experience with newborns and children because the women are often around babies because it's still
Yep.
stereotypically that way. And a lot of the time I have dads that come to me, granted, the partners and families that typically come to me are dads saying like, I want to be present and I don't know how to because they're
Yep.
not taught these things.
Mhm.
Or it's both parties coming to me saying, male partner saying, I don't know what I'm doing, I was never taught, and female partner saying, I was never taught and I don't feel like a mother because I don't know how to do these things. And society tells me I should know. And both
Mhm.
of those are so frustrating. um, the understanding that like just this maternal instinct is supposed to kick in for everything is just not not true, right? I mean, there are definitely
Mhm.
things that will kick in and you'll have parental instincts on stuff, but to know exactly why your baby's crying, what their eating schedule and napping schedule is supposed to be, and how to calm them and how to get them to sleep through the night and all these things are not things that people are going to know off the top of your head. And I love that you mentioned like moms are the ones Googling that because they know that, right? They feel like they need to know all this information. But it could equally be partners, fathers looking things up or finding support or
Mhm.
hiring the person to come help you navigate that. And I think that that is so true. And I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Just love that you like mentioned that.
Yeah, I think I have this idea that I've shared a couple times on social, but the idea of being just an informed parent, right? Even if you don't feel like an expert, if you're informed at least, or as informed as you can be, right? Like you're talking to your doctor, you're talking to the pediatrician, my kids are in daycare. I talk to their teachers. When they had EI, I talked to their EI specialist. Like I'm just talking to everybody and asking for feedback and thoughts. And, is this appropriate?
Right.
Is this not appropriate? I get just like gathering information, right? And if you're an informed parent, then you can have more active conversations with your partner about how you want to parent your kid, about why you want to do certain things, even things that I think also like as a woman, I think a lot about like weight and diet culture. And I have three daughters, and I think about how we want to approach that with them, right? And that's not really something my husband thinks about because it just hasn't impacted him the same way it's probably impacted me as a woman.
Right.
And so we had a discussion once about that. Like, hey, like we're not going to talk about food like this at all to any of our kids, but especially to our daughters. Like, we're just not going to talk about it like that. And he's like, like, why? And I was like, well, just you should Google it. You should read about it because the thing is, like, it's going to have lasting impact on the way they view food and view their body and view like their source of energy, etc. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and so I feel informed about it, and he didn't feel informed about it. And so
Right.
once he was, we could have a conversation, the two of us, about how we wanted to handle it in our house, right? And so
Absolutely.
I just think it's about doing that work. Like as a parent, none of us know everything. There's no way possible, and every single kid is so different that I find that I'm still learning on my fourth what to do with her. Right? I'm like, oh
Right.
my gosh, she's different than the others, and she needs different things than the others, and that's always going to be the case. We're always going
Yeah.
to need to be learning as parents what to do.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. Now, what does this all kind of like look like in practice? Like when you first kind of realized this mental load was something that was like really weighing on you, how do you suggest to like people that follow you and are experiencing these types of things? Like, how do you navigate that with a partner? How do you bring it up? Because it can, like you said earlier, it can feel very like one-sided. It can feel very like, I'm right, you're wrong in a partnership of like you're not doing enough, which can
Mm-hmm.
feel really hard for partners, right? But we have to mention these things. We can't just sit and like become these overly exhausted, touched out people.
Mm-hmm.
So how do these conversations like start and how do they continue to happen when you notice like things come up now even?
Yeah, I would say don't do what I did. Don't get to your fourth baby and burn out, right? I think as much work that you can do before you have children, the better, even before you're married, right? I think there's a conversation to be had before marriage about what kind of parents you want to be, what kind of home structure you want to have, what you want that path to look like. Do you want your kids to be in daycare or with a nanny, depending on your financial capabilities? Like, is somebody going to stay at home? Have that idea in your brain of kind of what you guys think you want. And it's going to change, obviously. But what you think you want. And then I really advocate for reading the book Fair Play. If people haven't read that book, there's other books you can read too, but Fair Play is one that really outlines how this dynamic happens between men and women and why it happens both societally, but just like in individual relationships and structures on how to get out of it, right? And that's actually what I did. So I had heard Eve Rodsky, she wrote the book on a podcast like 6 months before I had my baby or something. And so I started following along and learning about it and reading her book. And then when my fourth was born and I was kind of at my breaking point, I kind of recalled all of what I knew from her book. And I was like, hey, and I had mentioned it to my husband a couple of times, but he's like, we don't need that. We're fine. We don't need that. We're fine. And I was like, we're not fine. I'm not fine. You're fine. I'm not fine.
Yeah.
And so finally I was like, hey, she has this game you can do. And what her game is essentially is you take every household task, every childcare task, everything down to the like, who buys birthday presents for friends' birthday parties, like little kid birthday parties? Who plans your kids' birthday parties? Who cuts their nails? Like, who's
Oh my
doing all these
gosh.
things, right? And it's hundreds of, like 100 plus tasks, give or take. And the idea is here that you essentially have a deck of cards with these tasks and you hand them out and you guys take ownership, full ownership of this task, right? And this is where I think it gets muddy and the mental load thing comes into it, which is okay, you can't be the cook dinner person if you don't also meal plan, meal prep, know what everybody's going to eat, and kind of
Yep.
like logistically coordinate dinner. You can't just show up and cook it. You have to do the whole task. Like you have to own all of that, right? And so even if it's laundry, like if you own laundry, you also own buying detergent and like all of those things that have to happen, knowing whose laundry gets done on what day, or if my child has eczema, like were we using a different formula for her stuff? We're treating her stuff differently. You need to know and
Right.
do and execute all of that. And so for us, we got to this breaking point, and I basically was like, hey, we're doing this. No ifs, ands, or buts. And he was definitely very defensive, as I think many, many men are, because it does feel like your partner's coming to you saying you're not a good dad or you're not a good partner. And
Right.
that's not what's being said, but it's what they often hear. Like I used to say that to my
Absolutely.
husband, I'm like, you're hearing something that I'm not saying. I'm not saying you're a bad husband. I'm not saying you're a bad dad. I'm saying that I'm drowning. That's what I'm saying. Like I am drowning, and this is how you can help me. Like this is how we can do this together.
Yeah.
And I think people need to reframe that too. And I know that's really hard because when somebody comes at you and says you're not doing anything or doing enough, it feels like a negative feedback, right? Nobody likes to get that.
Totally.
But I found that once we were able to sit down and do it, I'm an Excel kind of gal. So I made an Excel spreadsheet. And so if any of your listeners want it, I give it out to people all the time. But I made an Excel spreadsheet and I had one column that was like current state, right? And I put down who owned what current state and then like future state. And then I tallied it up. So we looked at the current state. And I think out of 100 tasks, I had 95 or something. And he had five. And I was like, can you see why I'm drowning?
While
Right?
you're
Like all of
drowning.
these
Yeah.
things fall on me and they seem small, right? Like when you say, like, hey, I just had to buy birthday presents for 10 kids, or I just had to like, book all the dentist appointments. And all those things, they feel really small, but when you add them up, it's exhausting.
Yep.
And so we went through and like reallocated based on people's like skill sets or like what they wanted to do. Not like if there's a task you really don't want to do, then I think you have to have that conversation and you say, like, hey, that's something I don't want to own. I don't think I'm going to be good at it. I'm going to drop the ball, not mine. Not in a weaponized incompetence way, but just like in a like, hey, we're like having an active conversation about who's doing what. So
Right.
let's put it on the table. And like my husband's like, I don't want to buy little kid birthday presents. Like that's not my strong suit. I'm like, yeah, I'm happy to do that because I know exactly what I get every party. I know who gets what. I know where I'm buying it. I have it like it's clockwork for me. I can make that happen. So we did that and we evened it up, and it's not even, it's not equal. The goal was to be more equitable. So it's not equal, but it's more equitable. So I think we walked away, and at that point I was at like 70 tasks and he was at, 30, give or take. And even just that felt so much lighter for me.
Right.
Like I had
Because
brain
you'd been
space.
doing all of it for three kids.
Yes, yes. And through a pandemic, and like I think the pandemic, any parent who parented through
Yeah.
the pandemic, it was just this added layer because he's a first responder. So he was out of the house and I was in the house with all of the kids. And so
Oh, yeah.
I was physically present, whereas he could not be. And so this shift kind of like really was exasperated by that. And I think that happens in a lot of homes where one person works outside the house and the other works in the house or even stays
Hmm.
at home. It can really make it harder to navigate these things. But I found that it took us a while, like a year, to really get our groove and to stop needing to like revisit these conversations. And now we're at the point where it's very much like we have a calendar that we use. So like I have personal time that I get to use a couple times a week. It's almost like PTO from parenting, right? Like I
I
have
love
that,
it.
he has that. And then if like tonight I'm going out to dinner with my mom and my sister, and normally I wouldn't do that on a Thursday. So now it's like, okay, delegating, like, okay, we have Taekwondo. I can do that, but I'm going to do this. And like he knows everything that's happening. So I don't need to tell him. He knows how to step in my absence because now we've been sharing this work
Yep.
for so long that it's really just a matter of like handing over the keys at this point.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I think it was really hard. I will say that. Like, I think it's really hard to change these dynamics and to have these conversations. And they're delicate on both sides, but I think they're important conversations to have. And if you can do it before kids, the better. If you can't and you're in the thick of it, it's going to be uncomfortable for a little while.
Yep.
Like it just is, and it's going to take time. And you have to be able to release some control over things, right? Like the way my husband cuts my daughter's nails, I'm like, I round them, like, but like he whatever, like he's cutting them how he wants to cut them, and that's fine. I don't have to
Right.
do it. And so it's kind of you have to release some control too, which can be hard when you've been the person responsible for something for so long. It can be hard. It's not that you're controlling, it's that it's been your job. So when you hand over your job to someone else, it's hard not to have opinions on it, but you do have to kind of work together to decide what that level of care is going to look like and then let go of the reins a bit.
Yeah, that's so funny you brought that up because that was gonna be my next question was like, as a type A person myself, trying to delegate things can sometimes be hard. And I can only imagine that like if you've been doing that for whatever amount of years with whatever amount of children, right? And been doing the same thing the same way, not only does it probably feel weird and like nerve-wracking to hand things off occasionally, like, oh, I do things very differently than that, right? Or oh, I have a way to do that much faster and wanting to like give that input and stuff. But again, that can make it feel like the other person feels like they don't know what they're doing when they can, I'm sure, figure it out. And that just breaks the whole hope of trying to hand off that mental load, right? Um, why
Yeah.
delegate a task to somebody else if you're going to tell them exactly how to do it? And like,
Hmm.
and I'm sure that like with children too, like children have no filter. I'm sure at some point one of them have been like, Daddy, you're cutting my fingernails the wrong way. Like, so it definitely can be, opportunity for, like you said, a bit of awkwardness and uncomfortable feelings and thoughts for a while there, I'm sure, as things kind of start to iron out.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's not the most comfortable thing to walk through with a partner, right? But I think, I'm on the other side of it. It's been my daughter's almost two. She'll be two in a couple months. And yeah, I don't really have to think about these things anymore because our home's kind of just like a well-oiled machine at this point. There's obviously still adjustments that you're always making because your kids are changing. So I'll say that. Like, I think for every phase of life, there's an adjustment to make. I have kids in public school now who do like after school activities, and that's like a whole different ball game, right? Like, who's
Oh
going
yeah.
here? Who's picking up here? Who's doing this? It's just a lot. There's a lot to do. Um, Whereas babies are a whole different thing, right? And once you're out of the baby phase, it feels different, but there's still work. It's just different work. And so it's
Right.
important to constantly be communicating, which I think most couples should be doing anyways, right? But it's important to constantly be communicating about the new needs, right? And being in alignment about what your kids need, what you need, right? I think we're in that point now, my husband and I, where I knew I needed more time out of this house. I work from home and I do mornings by myself. And so I'm with the kids from the second I wake up to the second I go to bed because I'm never
Right.
not here. And I was like, I don't see adults. I don't see anything but the walls of this house and my kids' faces. I need some space, right? I need some space for me because I'm never not with my work and my housework and my kid work. Like I'm always with it, always. I never get to
Yeah.
kind of like even physically remove myself from the space. So, now I go to like yoga once or twice a week. But that for me was huge. Like being able to know that I could leave and he's got it. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to do extra work or expect to come home to extra work.
Yep.
Now I can go and fully enjoy myself and not worry about anything and be a person that lives outside of motherhood a little bit, even if it's just two
Yeah.
hours a week.
No, seriously, I love that. And it's so hard because you sometimes you need a self-care like mental reset and like the
Yeah.
idea like you said of like coming back to not having more work to do or not having to do more work before you leave is like huge. Like, oh, I don't need to make dinner before I leave or like, oh, the dishwasher is going to be like filled and running when I get home. Like that sounds insane. But
Hmm.
when you talk and you have these tough conversations, like that's something that is doable and that is, respectable for both parties to be able to do for one another. So I love that. I love that so much. Now, do you want to share like a couple like specific things that you see mental load wise? I know you mentioned like doing dinner and like grocery shopping and things like that. But I know you have like tons of videos out there on like all these different things that people kind of feel like, oh my gosh, I totally relate to that. And that makes them probably realize that they need to have these kinds of conversations themselves. Do you have any specifics that you could be like, oh, if you're experiencing these, you probably want to have this kind of a conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think a big one that a lot of families have is just coordination around childcare. Like oftentimes, for some reason, not some reason, society and the way we've been raised,
Right.
women are defaulted as a person to like coordinate, plan, and execute childcare, right? Even on date nights, right? Your partner might say to you, like, let's go on a date. And it's like, okay, great. And then they don't do anything. You're like, well, we can't go on a date without a babysitter. And
Right.
we need to find a babysitter and we need to interview them, make sure we feel comfortable with them, maybe call a reference or two. We need to figure out how much we're going to pay them. We need to figure out all these things. We need to see if they're available. And then if they are available, book them, right? And tell them when to come over and then get them information about the kids, right? Like it's this whole thing.
Yeah.
Date night's a big one where men will often say, that women lose sight of marriage, right? In motherhood. They don't prioritize their marriage. But it's hard when you view something like a date night as work, right? You're like, okay, yeah, it sounds fun to go on a dinner date with you, but you show up and I had to do 3 hours of work just to get here. And so now I'm
Right.
tired. And now it's not even fun for me because I'm just exhausted. So I think that's one, right? Like arranging childcare, anything to do with kind of daycare, right? Like I went on like so many daycare tours and got on all the wait lists and figured out the pricing for all of them. And who's doing that? It's not enough to be the person who picks up and drops off. You also need to have done some of that work. Know the teachers' names. That's the big one. Like know your kids' teachers' names. Know what their schedule is at school. Know if they have extra clothes in their backpack. Know when it's library day. Know when it's pizza day. Those are things that oftentimes moms know. And then dad's like, wait, what day is it today? And mom's like, oh, it's crazy sock Tuesday. Like, can you bring like make sure they're wearing crazy socks? That is all that mental stuff, right? It's not about who puts the crazy socks on the kid. It's about who knew and who kept track of it and who reads the school emails and who puts it in their calendar that it's Spirit Week, right? Who
Right.
does that work? And then can you share that? And can you at least both know it? Like, why does one person have to know all these things? The schools, if you have kids in public schools, the emails are so long. There's so much information in them and it's
Mm-hmm.
exhausting. And I've
Mm-hmm.
missed things for sure. I've missed things, but I think those are two big ones. I think honestly, like ones that people often relate to is like kids sports or kids camps, like signing up, registering, filling out the paperwork, making sure they have all the equipment when it comes time for
So
camp.
many
Is their
steps.
backpack stocked with, yeah, do they have the bug spray and the sunscreen and the towel and the extra bathing suit and the underwear?
Yeah.
It's like who's doing all of that, right? Who's coordinating that and thinking through that? Because that's a lot of work. Like that's a lot of work to think about and manage and know. And it's again, it's not like moms have this Rolodex of all the daycares and the camps and the town. They just do the work to figure it out. Um,
Absolutely.
so those are like big ones, but everything in your home has some sort of mental load behind it. Kids' laundry, kids' seasonal clothing swaps, what fits,
Yeah.
what doesn't fit, what size shoe are they, what size pant are they? Do they hate jeans? Do they only wear quote unquote comfy pants now? Or like what? Like my son went through that phase where he's like, only comfy pants. And I'm like, okay, jeans,
Literally.
jeans are out. No more jeans for this kid, right? But if you aren't tasked with knowing, then you can't
You don't
participate in
know.
those tasks in a way that's actually helpful, right? You can't take the new clothes and put them in and old clothes take them out because you don't even know what size you're weeding out.
Right.
Um, and so that's a big one I hear from moms a lot, like just those
Yeah.
things that add up. They're a ton of work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that it could truly, like you said, there's so much to it. It could go on and on and on. And
Mhm.
I love that you brought up the whole daycare side of thing. I know a lot of your posts are also on, trying to express the struggles and the financial parts that go along with childcare and daycare and, keeping kids cared for as a whole. And I feel like that's just such a whole nother topic too. Like people should definitely check out your socials and maybe you'll come back another time and we can chat more about like childcare and whatnot. As somebody who
Yeah.
was an infant teacher and then managed a daycare, like a huge daycare, I totally get it. The prices I
Yeah.
know are crazy. And so coming from a parent perspective, I'm sure it could be interesting. And then coming from like as my side of the behind the scenes of what it looks like and what it's like to be an employee there, I could definitely feel like that would be a very relatable episode. So maybe we'll have to
Yeah.
loop back to that. But I really appreciate you coming on and sharing this kind of information. Hopefully people, you know, are more confident in bringing up this conversation with their partners now. And even though it may be uncomfortable, Paige is here to tell you that it's the grass is greener on the other side, right?
It is, and it's daunting to do it, or to even bring up the words, but it's important. I think somebody said something along the lines of like clarity is kindness. I don't remember who
Yeah.
to credit it to, but I've heard that a bunch. Clarity is kindness, like being clear with your partner about what you need, what your expectations are, what your experience is, because if they don't know, they can't actually change anything. So like we can stew in our own resentment or frustration, but if you don't actually make efforts to change it, it doesn't change. So it's important to have the conversations early and often. And yeah, you'll feel, I know I feel a lot better. I'm also out of the newborn haze, so maybe that helps. But
Absolutely.
I think it really does help mothers and fathers, right? We all get
Yeah,
to be a little bit more involved.
absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Postpartum Plan podcast. I hope that today's episode brought you support, relatability, and valuable insight. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave a review and share with any of your prenatal and postpartum friends and family. Your feedback helps us reach more parents seeking support. And if you're looking for additional resources, please feel free to connect via Instagram at Serene Moments Doula for constant information, tips, and tricks, or check out my website, www.serenemomentsdoula.com. See you next week.